around the church, and you can read all about it in News and Notes, which people are familiar with. Today we have a special collection for the Unitarian Universalist Action Network of Illinois, or UUANI. We'll take contributions today, and we'll also take contributions next week to capture the larger audience we expect next week. Here's one announcement that I have. I posted this to Facebook recently, and it got a lot of positive comments, so I think it was something that made sense to a lot of people, and I'll repeat it now. This year, we will have cicadas. No matter what we do, we'll have cicadas. If we wanted to stop them, we couldn't. No matter what happens in the world, in politics, in our personal lives, we will have cicadas. Some things, like the sunrise, the weekend, that deadline, the day after Election Day, are inevitable, like cicadas. I guess the theme of that post was, time continues to move forward, and whatever we fear, it will come or it will not. We can affect how things work out, but the passage of time is beyond our control. And therefore, we can just ride it out until it happens. But how we relate to events and our expectations is definitely within our control. I was thinking about optimism the other day. We don't know what will happen. Your family, your job, you can make some predictions and have some expectations. But things that are largely out of our control, whether it's a sporting event, the weather, elections, illness, the economy, we just don't know what will happen. And you can look at it optimistically or pessimistically. Which one makes more sense? Well, let's look at this chart. There's an event coming up. The result could be good or it could be bad. Now, let's see if I can, okay, I can't get the cursor. So the top line is, that's the line for the good result. Things go up and they're really nice. And the bottom line is the line for the bad result. If you're a pessimist and you expect a bad result and things turn out well, so there's the bottom line for pessimism. If things turn out well, the upper line, you're thrilled because you're surprised by how well things turned out. And if things go poorly, you're not surprised and you're not disappointed. If you're an optimist, and there's the line for optimism, and things turn out well, you're happy with the outcome and satisfied that you guessed right. But if things turn out poorly, you're very disappointed, maybe crushed. See the difference between that top dotted line and the bad result. It's so much worse than you thought. You're crushed. So from this viewpoint, it would seem a better bet to be pessimistic. You're never disappointed. You're never crushed. But look at this whole time in here. If you're a pessimist, you're feeling bad all the time. Every minute of every day you say, I got a bad feeling about this. And look how much negative energy you harness during this whole time. And it affects your outlook, your work, your relations with those around you. And your friends, your family, your coworkers pay the price. But if you're an optimist, the whole time leading up to the event, you're positive. And you have a positive effect on those around you. It's my view that the pain and disappointment of having a bad result is far outweighed by the positive emotions you will have for months leading up to the event if you walk around with optimism. And if you're a pessimist, all that gloom and doom you feel leading up to the event far outweighs the joy of being pleasantly surprised. So adding up the whole experience over time, the net result is that optimism is a better long-term strategy. Since how you feel cannot affect how things turn out, you might as well have and radiate as much positive energy as possible for as long as possible. It's not Pollyanna. It's not woo-woo, feel-good vibes. It's just logic. It's like Descartes. With this in mind, I'd like to introduce one of our announcements for this week. Next Sunday, January 21st, your Green Sanctuary Committee will present a talk by Kent Taylor of the Climate Reality Project. Climate Reality Project was founded by Al Gore, and Kent Taylor is the climate leader and a presenter for the project. Mr. Taylor will talk about the current state of climate issues and what we can do as humans to deal with and reduce the change that we humans have caused. There's a better, easier to read version of the flyer downstairs. That's next Sunday, January 21st at noon right here at church. And the following weekend, on Saturday, January 27th, we're hosting a workshop titled The Spiral of the Work That Reconnects, led by our minister, Reverend Beth Johnson. This workshop is based on the work of eco-philosopher and author Joanna Macy, including her book, Active Hope. Speaking as I was about optimism and pessimism, we've been talking in church for over a year about how to maintain hope for the future in the presence of our current climate crisis and all the other crises that are going on. This workshop will give us the tools and activities to renew ourselves, improve our outlook, and prepare for the work that still needs to be done to improve the future. I often think about it as just getting your head right in order to keep on keeping on, doing what each of us can to change the world for the better. This is not a book discussion. It's a workshop to help you change the way you think, adopt energizing physical practices, and take every action you can to accept the fact of climate change while not accepting the inevitability of disaster. It's about filling that space with hope and optimism instead of despair and resignation. The workshop is on Saturday afternoon, January 27th, from 1 till 4. You need to register, and you can register using the QR code on the flyers in the church or at the site that will appear in news and notes. We've invited people from other churches and the community to come, and it would be great if we have a large crowd from UCH at the workshop. I read the book, and I know the people putting the workshop together, and if you do nothing else to try to prime yourself to get through this coming year, you got to do this workshop. And there will be door prizes. Everybody gets a bookmark, and there will be prizes. And now we'll light our chalice.
We light our chalice, the symbol of our church and denomination, with these words. In the light of truth and the warmth of love, we gather to seek, to sustain, and to share.
The candle's too cold. Okay. Now we'll have a time for all ages. Oh, okay.
Do you want to just skip that then?
Let's skip that then. All right.
Jean, how do I skip it? What? Just hit the... Gotcha.
Oh, yeah. He told me that.
There we go.
Now you can,
Next one.
yeah. Yeah. How many Unitarians does it take to work a PowerPoint? Thank you. Okay, now, please join us in our first hymn, which is Hail the Glorious Golden City, number 140 in your hymnals and also projected on the screen. I think we can all be proud of the work that we have builded over the years.
Our first reading is from a speech by Dr. Martin Luther King to a meeting of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in August of 1967. And one day, we must ask the question, why are there 40 million poor people in America? And when you begin to ask that question, you are raising questions about the economic system, about a broader distribution of wealth.
Now is our time for meditation. Please sink down into your chair, feet flat on the floor. Picture a flame, a fire, warming you and everything around you. An inspiring breath in, a cleansing breath out. We enter this space bringing with us joys, concerns, challenges, and blessings. If you have something either weighing or dancing on your heart this morning, you are invited to come up to drop a stone. If you wish, you can say a name, a word, or a short phrase to share your intention. And remember, we're being broadcast on the wireless, so you may want to stick to first names.
My brother-in-law, John, from Maryland, had a stroke Tuesday. We were over at his place over the holidays, and they're always a wonderful host. He cooks and does all this stuff. He's a great soccer dad. So a lot of those Sundays, weekends with his kids playing, refereeing soccer, and so again, we're hoping for the best. It's a little unclear what the outlook's going to be, but anyway, that's the latest news.
If you're on YouTube, please feel free to share in the chat any joys and concerns that you have as well, and I'll add a stone for that.
And the biggest stone I can find for strength and wisdom for all of us for the coming year of challenges.
Our next reading is from an article by Dr. King in the magazine The Nation, March 14th, 1966. Our nation is now so rich, so productive, that the continuation of persistent poverty is incendiary because the poor cannot rationalize their deprivation. We have yet to confront and solve the international problems created by our wealth in a world still largely hungry and miserable. But more immediate and pressing is the domestic existence of poverty. It is an anachronism in the second half of the 20th century. Only the neglect to plan intelligently and adequately, and the unwillingnessly genuinely to embrace economic justice enable it to persist. This month's special collection is for the Unitarian Universalist Action Network of Illinois, or UUANI. I would like to invite Scott Asang to come up to speak to us about the UUANI.
Thank you, and it's good to be with you again today. Again, I'm Scott Ossing, Director of UUANI, UU Advocacy Network of Illinois, but we'll take Action Network too. First of all, I'd like to thank UCH for your ongoing and generous support over the years. You've been with UUNI from the beginning. Tracy led it for several years in the middle, and we look forward to renewing and deepening our partnership in this next coming years with Reverend Beth joining our board. At our 10th anniversary event in November, we got to celebrate how far we've come over the last 10 years. From a single rally to pass marriage equality back in 2013, to being a regular presence in Springfield every spring, and having legislative advocacy teams in multiple congregations. From working on one or two issues at a time, to having long-standing partnerships with organizations led by people impacted by injustice, whether it's racism and mass incarceration, anti-immigrant xenophobia, anti-gay and anti-trans homophobia, climate change, and environmental injustice. We've come from being an overwhelmingly white organization at the beginning to having an accountability council of black and brown UUs and a statewide BIPOC organizer. We've gone from having a handful of people participating in occasional workshops to over 65 people participating in at least 10 hours of congregational organizing training for spiritually grounded, relationally accountable, and strategically effective social justice work. And we've gone from collecting a few hundred petitions and voter pledges to sending thousands of emails to legislators every year and making over 100,000 voter contacts in the last two elections. This year, as part of larger statewide coalitions, we're poised to hopefully finally pass elder parole either this year or next year, I'm convinced, thanks in no small part to UCH members, which would give incarcerated seniors a chance to become contributing members of society. We're poised to secure more resources to incorporate migrant families seeking a better life into our communities. We're poised to make sure that students are getting comprehensive health, safety, and sex education in schools across the state. poised to continue supporting people coming to our state seeking reproductive and gender-affirming health care. And we're poised to institute protections against carbon capture and sequestration and to launch major new campaigns for equitable and sustainable transportation, clean heat, and clean power. And of course, we can only do this with your support and participation. So thank you again for all you do and for being part of our statewide network of congregations working together for justice, beloved community, and a healthy planet. Thank you again.
Thank you, Scott, so much for joining us on this frigid morning. So just a reminder that all cash contributions today will go to UUANI. If you would like to contribute to UUANI by check, write your check to UCH and write UUANI in the memo line. If you would like your payment to go to the church, please write pledge or UCH in the memo line. And just a reminder, as Dave said, we'll also be doing the special collection next week as well to get more people who are here present in church. Let's say these words together. This church is made up of all of us. It is what we learn together, the work we do together, the fun we have together. It is what we share with one another, with people around us, and with the world. Thank you in advance for your generosity.
And please join us, rise in body or spirit, and sing our next hymn, which is Step by Step, the longest march, number 157 in the hymn book, and also displayed on the screen. Step by step, the longest march. Tomorrow is the holiday celebrating Dr. Martin Luther King's birthday. Today, I will not talk about race or racism or social justice, and I won't, except in this introductory paragraph, say, I have a dream. That's because Dr. King's less known but also important message was about economic justice. Dr. King said, "It seems to me that the civil rights movement must now begin to organize for the guaranteed annual income, begin to organize people all over our country and mobilize forces so that we can bring to the attention of our nation this need and this something which I believe will go a long, long way toward dealing with the Negro's economic problem and the economic problem with many other poor people confronting our nation." He also said, "The problem indicates that our emphasis must be twofold. We must create full employment, or we must create incomes. People must be made consumers by one method or the other. When they are placed in this position, We need to be concerned that the potential of the individual is not wasted. New forms of work that enhance the social good will have to be devised for those for whom traditional jobs are not available. We remember, if we read, that Dr. King, in the later years of his career and his life, spent a good deal of time organizing and leading the Poor People's Campaign. In fact, the last speech he gave in Memphis was to striking sanitation workers, talking about better wages, better working conditions, economic justice for everyone. Since Dr. King's work over 50 years ago, we see that there are still barriers to economic opportunity for everyone. We still have work to do. The federal minimum wage has not increased since 2009, while the incomes of CEOs have grown by more than half. Since 1978, the minimum wage has gone up by 3 times, while CEO compensation has gone up by 1,400%. In 2022, the percentage of Americans living in poverty was about 11%, almost exactly the same as it was in 1968. Since the 1970s, the median income of those at the top of the economic chart has gone up 150%, or as much as 150% more than the income of those in the lower portion. There are some who say that the only way to address the serious inequity in our economic system is to do away with the system, to dismantle the capitalist patriarchy. I was talking to someone recently who said that we need a system that is not based on greed and acquisition, but there is none. Never has been. Going back to ancient Assyria, as soon as people found out that Zardan was good at carving tools, people would go up to him and say, "Hey, Zardan, can you carve me a hoe?" And Zardan said, "Sure, if you give me some of your grain." And that was the birth of the free market. And when Zardan was able to spend more time making tools because others were growing grain for him, he got better at making tools, and he could raise his prices. And when people were able to specialize, they worked more efficiently and produced a surplus. They needed a place to store the surplus and someone to guard it, and someone to decide how it got distributed. And that led to power and hierarchy. And it's been like that ever since. If we had some written record from 2,000 years ago to reflect how long there had been poverty. Oh wait, we do have such a written record. It's the Bible. And in it, Jesus said, "The poor will be with us always." But people have tried to change the greed-based economic system over the centuries. In England, in the Middle Ages, there was a lot of common land. Small-scale farmers owned a few acres, and each village had a bunch of fields and forests of common land where people could graze their animals and collect wood and berries and mushrooms. But the big landowners determined that it would be more profitable to have everyone manage their own land. So they divided up the common land among all the villagers. And then all the land could be enclosed by walls and fences and hedges. But of course, the less well-off got the worst quality land. Or the big landowners used the simple expedient of requiring everybody to put a stone wall around their land. And the least wealthy couldn't afford to build the stone, to buy the stone to build walls. So, sorry, you lose your land. And this enclosure practice spread, and people called levelers advocated the leveling of walls and the leveling of all social classes. In the 1700s and 1800s, cloth manufacturers used first water power and then steam power to drive machines for spinning fiber and weaving fabric, putting many home producers out of business. Working people got together and attacked the new mills, breaking the knitting and weaving frames in the factories. In the 1800s, the economic philosophy of anarchism came to be. We think of anarchy now as chaos, people running wild in the streets. But there is an organized philosophy that said, if people would just realize what was in their best interest, they would cooperate and we wouldn't need government. If, for example, a town needed to build a road, the people would all realize the value of the road and all get together and pay for the construction. But what about that old crank who lives at the end of the road and say, we don't need no road, I ain't paying for no road? Well, you'd have to make sure the old crank didn't get to use the road. Or better, put a toll on the road so that only those who actually use the road would have to pay for it. But then you'd have to have people to collect the tolls and people to watch the toll collectors and keep them honest. And now you have a government and a hierarchy. Communism started out as one branch of anarchism. The idea was that if people would just learn to share, then everyone would produce as much as they can and take just what they need. And when people work together, you wouldn't need a government. But there's a problem with any economic theory that starts with, if people would just... First, communism is inefficient because those who are most productive are not going to work at top speed if they know that a lot of what they produce, they're not going to be able to keep. And those who don't feel like producing much will sit on their lounge chairs knowing that they will get what they need in any event. And second, communism is fundamentally unfair because it requires someone, there's that pesky government again, to take from those who have too much and distribute it to those who didn't earn it. Edward O. Wilson, famous biologist and world expert in ants, was once asked what he thought about communism. He said, good idea, wrong species. He meant that communism was well suited to ants who are all related, but not to humans who have striven to achieve and acquire ever since Zardon got good at making tools. So if the hierarchy can't be destroyed, is it time to despair? We will not overturn the capitalist patriarchy anytime soon. But it's a trap to conclude that we can't change anything if we can't overturn the system. I've heard people say that we can't save or solve, for example, environmental problems until we dismantle the patriarchy. But this means that we'll never solve any problems. The people say often you can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. In economics, for over 100 years, things have been getting better. At the turn of the last century, we saw improvements in the laws regarding wages and hours, working conditions, food safety. And the ruling elite pushed back on every one of these. But the people won because there are more of us than there are of them. Franklin D. Roosevelt brought in the New Deal with Social Security, unemployment insurance, government safeguards of banks. John F. Kennedy, and especially Lyndon B. Johnson, declared a war on poverty, brought in Medicare, Medicaid, and Head Start. Again, the ruling elite pushed back, and again, the people won. It's only in the last 40 years that the ruling elite have controlled the narrative. In an unholy alliance between wealth, political power, and the demons of racism, fear, hatred, and unreason, they have convinced millions of Americans to sell themselves out to the richest 1%. But look around. Today, right now, things are changing. This reminds me of history, of course. In the 1300s, in the Great Plague, the Black Death, it ended serfdom in England and led to its demise everywhere else in Europe. In serfdom, an owner of a small farm actually rented the land from a great lord, and part of the rent was paid in services. The owner of a small farm would have to do agricultural work at planting time in the spring and at harvest time in the fall when the lord needed more labor. To keep that source of labor, the rules were that the small farmer couldn't sell his land without his lord's consent. He couldn't pick up and move to another county or a big city without his lord's consent. If Tom the plowman showed up as at a stranger at some other lord's manor, the lord would ask him where he was from, and he would text the lord of that area and ask if he had lost any agricultural labors recently. If the other lord described Tom the plowman, Tom would be handed over to the authorities and forced to go back to his lord, often being severely penalized for leaving his employment. But the plague ended all that. The plague reduced the population of England by somewhere between a quarter and a third, similar numbers to the rest of Europe. Whole villages just vanished. There was such a shortage of labor that the lords stopped asking where Tom the plowman was from and just hired him at the spot at ever higher wages. And the ruling elite pushed back. They passed not minimum wage laws, but maximum wage laws. It was illegal to pay your workers more than they had made 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago. But nobody cared. The people won. Serfdom was ended over time in England, and people started making actual livable wages. This pandemic that we've just been through has had a similar effect. It revealed how bad working conditions and wages were. People are now demanding accommodations and better pay. States and cities have enacted their own laws, raising the minimum wage and protecting workers. And have you noticed the level of union activity? People at Starbucks, Amazon, Google are demanding union representation. This past year, the Auto Workers Union got record wage increases and protections of job security. This year, 2024, a whole set of Trump-era tax cuts are expiring. These tax cuts benefited the wealthiest owners and the largest corporations. Big surprise. They will come to an end, and there is nothing the ruling elite can do about it. The Inflation Reduction Act of a couple of years ago, which was created by President Biden and passed by a Democratic Congress, created a minimum tax rate for corporations, expanded the coverage of Obamacare, allowed Medicare to negotiate drug prices, and provided billions of dollars for protecting the climate. Things are changing, and what can we do? What can each of us do? Of course, I've said this before, I'll say it again, vote. This is the most important election of my lifetime. It will determine not just who's in office, what changes are made to the economic system. It will determine whether we will continue to have our form of American democracy. Winston Churchill once said that democracy is the worst form of government ever developed, except for all the others. Benjamin Franklin once said, "You have your republic, now see if you can keep it." John F. Kennedy once said, "The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who, in time of moral crisis, preserve their neutrality." Vote. Tell especially young people to vote. Combat the idea that it doesn't make a difference, that we won't end the capitalist patriarchy this year or next, but we can get ourselves a government that will make the changes that need to be made this year. And if you watch the news and you look at the division in Congress, you know that it's really, really close. There does not need to be a revolution. There need to be a few elections that go the right way. And while it's pretty clear what the results of most elections in Illinois will be this fall, you can travel to other states where elections hang in the balance. If you can afford it, contribute to political campaigns in those swing states. Back in 2008, a group of some friends and people in church and me and my wife Suzanne, we went to Ohio to work on election day. And to this day, that election day stands out as one of the best days of my life. Okay, this is not a political rally. This is a church. What can we do, each of us, internally, to make our own lives a little better in the midst of all this chaos? Well, do what you need in order to discuss or to disconnect from the all-powerful machine. Here's a quote from one of my favorite podcasts, the horror podcast Pseudopod, which I highly recommend if you like horror and scary things. It's Pseudopod. And this is from episode 841, so there's a lot of binging you can do. Here's the quote. "The machine is right there, all the time. It's right there and it hates us. And it needs us. And it hates that it needs us. Do your best to need as little of it as possible." What can we do internally? Ask yourself if the latest phone or the next biggest TV will actually make you any happier. You know what I saw in the newspaper the other day? A story about outdoor kitchens. On your patio, you can have a little fire pit. You know, you can have a little water feature. You can turn your patio into a kitchen with cabinets, countertops, and a sink in Chicagoland, year-round. Spend time in the woods. Maybe not today. Grow your own food. Even in a planter on a porch, you can grow a tomato plant. Grow native plants and make a home for all those pollinators that they say are so important. And by the way, planting native plants and not raking your leaves around the edges of your yard will bring you lightning bugs. Live in the knowledge that there are insects that light up at night. Sit on your patio or get right down on the ground and watch bees buzzing around your flowers. Or watch a colony of ants for an hour. It would make famous biologist Edward O. Wilson very happy. And go to the Active Hope Workshop on January 27th to get your head right and inspire you to make a difference. This year, we will have cicadas. No matter what we do, we'll have cicadas. We can't change that. The day after the election will come. We can't change that. But we can change how we feel about it before it gets here. And if we do what we can, we may, just may, change how the election turns out. And that is not a dream. Please stand, embody your spirit, and join in our hymn.
Our final reading is from a speech by Dr. King at New York City's Riverside Church on April 4th, 1967. We must rapidly begin the shift from a thing-oriented society to a person-oriented society. When machines and computers, profit motives, and property rights are considered more important than people, the giant triplets of racism, materialism, and militarism are incapable of being conquered. A true revolution of values will soon look uneasily on the glaring contrast of poverty and wealth.
Please join us in these words as we extinguish our chalice. This symbolic fire is out, but the fire has spread. We are on fire. We carry its heat and light into the world.